through the book of Exodus. We are now, I think it's our 10th? This is our 10th class, amazing. We've done, 10 plagues. We finally got to the 10th plague. So today we'll look at the 10th plague. Of course, is the most dramatic, for sure, the death of the firstborn. And but I asked the Rabbi to give us a quick review, because I never really heard all this about the sets of the 3 sets of threes, 3, 6, 9, coming up to the 10th plague. And so there is insights that are given. So we'll hopefully we'll go through that a little bit too. So welcome everybody. Rabbi Gadi. Ready to go? This is your book.
Hello everybody. I see people are still walking in here. This venue is a different venue, so our presentation is going to be different. We're going to come one by one instead of sitting all together. I always look at signs to see that God is in charge here. We didn't plan it this way, but this is our 10th session on the book of Exodus, and this is the 10th plague. So, and we're at this venue at the church and not in our regular venue because the Girl Scouts were using it. So it wasn't even up to us, but we're at a sanctuary, at a house of prayer and on this day for Christianity, that is Christ the King. And really the subject of what we're going to be talking about today is all about where Judaism and Christianity meet, and the bottom line of both. And the bottom line of both religions is the resurrection. Is that life never dies. By default, the breath of God never dies. It may change and transform, but it never dies, never cease. God never cease. So what we have is the story of the death of the firstborn. But really, it's a story of rebirth. That when we hear about the death of the firstborn, so think about the death of, I guess in Christianity, Jesus, right? It's death, but it's really for the purpose of rebirth. In the Jewish story, we see that all the time, that death and calamities are for the purpose of rebirth. So even coming out of slavery now, which today we'll be reading about, finally the Exodus happens here. But it doesn't happen, and we will try to find out if it can or can never happen without the actual death. Maybe the death is a necessity for the rebirth. You can't really be born without, or reborn without something dying. So we'll look at what died really with the firstborn in Egypt, and why is this a special and a unique plague. Up until now we spoke about 9 plagues that were divided to sets of 3s. So the first 3 were just to show people who are totally agnostic about the presence of God, that God can intervene in nature, that God can turn water into blood, can bring frog from the water, can bring lice from sand. And that was the first part. The second part was for people who may believe in God, but do not believe that God has providence, personal providence, doesn't look specifically at what we do. For example, there are people who say, well, God created this world, this huge, and for us human beings, we sometimes can't even imagine how big this universe is, right? There's billions of stars and millions of planets and galaxies. And would God care about if we keep the Sabbath or don't keep the Sabbath, or if we slaughter a lamb this way or that way? So God shows us in the second set of three that He, at least He didn't just create the world and left. So He's still there. And then the third three was about the personal providence. So also, just kind of summarizing how we got here, and then all the 9, or really the 10 plagues correspond also to the 10 utterances that God said, let there be. So it goes invertly. The 10th plague that we will be speaking about today is referring to the first utterance of let there be. And actually the first utterance doesn't say let there be. It just says God created the heaven and earth. And then there are 9 let there be. So we're taught that the 10th plague, which is a human being, is referring to the first utterance of God creating heaven and earth. And the idea of creating heaven and earth is encapsulated in man, right? Human being are earth and then heaven. We are the balance between heaven and earth. In all the other animals, we don't see that God injected the breath in them. So they don't have that heavenly component that a human being has. So because the balance was disrupted when Pharaoh, as we said, Pharaoh is literally the word Pharaoh in Hebrew means to disrupt. He disrupted the understanding who is the master here. He said, I'm the master. And all these 10 plagues were to show Pharaoh and his people and everybody really in the world who is really the master. So we now come to the 10th plague. The 10th plague is different. We said there are 3 sets of 3, and then the 10th plague, which is the death of the firstborn. Why is this different? How do we see that this plague is different? First of all, just out of the structure of this plague, we see that we are required to do something. All the other plagues, God just did something, or Moses, God used Moses to bring a plague onto Egypt. So all Moses had to do is stretch his arm, and the plague was there. And then he had to stretch his arm again, and the plague was gone. So there was nowhere in the text that shows us that actually we, or the Israelites, had to do something to be participant in this plague. Which means that this was a plague, absolutely, because people died, but there was another component here that makes this whole episode of the 10th plague totally different than all the others. So one thing, of course, is that when God brought the 9 plagues to convince people that He exists, that's good. But it's like bringing horse to the water, but then the horse has to drink. Remember, God created this whole world to have relationship with us. So if the point is to bring back the order of creation, it means that it has to bring back the full human being into being, which means to give the freedom of choice, to exercise the freedom of choice. So what we had to do is to take the land of Egypt, which was an idol, according to the Talmud, the teaching, that it was one of their idols, and they had to take that lamb on the 10th of the first month. We didn't have a calendar at that point yet. The calendar was created at that point, but they had to take it on a Sabbath, on Shabbat, and that's why the Shabbat before Passover is called the Great Shabbat. And they had to hold the lamb for 4 days to show themselves and the Egyptians and the world that they are going to do something. And as we always say, when you perform a commandment, a mitzvah, there's always the idea of hechsher mitzvah. You have to prepare for the mitzvah. So those 4 days prepared them physically, spiritually, and so forth. What they had to do is to take the lamb, to slaughter it, and then to put the blood on the doorpost to show that they are believers, right? So, before we get to the text, there's a couple of things I want to also introduce. We keep saying that Moses keeps telling God telling Pharaoh to let my people go, right? But the other part of it is so they can serve me. So this is now all coming together. It's culminating in this moment because all the other plagues were God's hand. And this will be God's hand too. But the aspect of so they can worship me is not in all the other plagues. But it is in this plague. How so? When God smites the firstborn of the Egyptians, and he saves the firstborn of the Hebrews, he essentially buys them. He buys them. He saves their lives. Right? So now he owns them. And literally, in Jewish theology, that's exactly what it means. And that is why we have the ritual of redeeming the firstborn. When a firstborn male is born into a family, the family has to redeem that first child. How so? Because that first child is owned by God. Before the Levites went to serve in the temple, we know, right? You know that the tribe of Levi served and operated the temple. But originally, that was not the intention. Originally, the intention was that the firstborn of each family that was saved will go to serve God because God bought them. So that is the part of they will serve me. I'll let you go, come out, but so you can serve me. So this is a whole different plague and episode. So we will start reading the text, and we'll elaborate when we it's chapter 11. Do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the translation, it does say that there is, God said, let my people go so that they may serve me. Also, that word also could mean worship. And this is why we say sometimes, we're going to start the service now. The service of God. To serve God is to worship Him. So that's the primary service that we render God. So the word for worship and the word for service, they're kind of interchangeable. We hear it in English as, the service will begin now at 12 o'clock. So the service we enter is, in fact, worshiping God. So it wasn't let my people go, just to go dance in the desert and have freedom and sit down. They don't have to be slaves anymore. It was a very specific purpose that completes the sentence. Let my people go so that they may worship me and or serve me. It's interchangeable.
And it is interesting that we're teaching it on this day, but from the Jewish perspective too, to worship God is you can't worship God halfway. To worship God is to give everything. You have to give your whole self. So, for example, when you bring a sacrifice to the temple, that sacrifice has to be unblemished. Right? The bones cannot be broken. You can't have any kind of blemish. So even when we serve God, not even just the physical, of course, the physical offering has to be unblemished, but our heart has to be unblemished. Our intention has to be unblemished. So the 10 plague puts us in a place that we have to give everything. We have to give ourselves. The blood represents who we are. So the blood is also, birth. So really this plague comes with death, and with the death itself, we see life, because the people of Israel as a nation is being born now. And again, we said that not everybody survived to this point. There were many people, and as the Talmud, our oral tradition said, that 80% of the Hebrews died already. They died in the plague of darkness. And just to reiterate again, the three last plagues of darkness and the plague of the firstborn were all part of the darkness theme. When the locust covers the eye of the earth, you see already there's darkness coming, and then darkness itself, of course, and then the plague of the firstborn, that is, of course, total darkness and death. There's another idea that I want to introduce here, and we've talked about it during our lectures, that with all the miracles that happened in Egypt, our teachers tell us that there was the most amazing miracle, the most significant miracle, was that a nation came out of a nation. That we were able, after 400 years, to be able to extract a people out of another people. That was the most amazing miracle. And I could totally relate to it. Think of Italians that came from Italy to America. After one generation, second generation, you're an American, right? Try to now extract your Italianism out of you and go back to Italy. So this was after 400 years. So those three last plagues are actually compared to the ceremony of Havdalah. The Havdalah, if you've heard that term, is the separation that we perform after the Sabbath. After every Shabbat evening, we light a candle, we smell incense, and we drink the wine. And there are 3 blessings that come with that. That we say that God separated the mundane from the holy from the mundane, that God separated the light and darkness, and that God separated the Hebrews from other nations. So those 3 plagues at the end, the locust, the darkness, and the plague of the firstborn, represent that phase of separating a nation from nation. It was, of course, everything has stages and phases. So the first one, when we say that God separated the mundane from the holy, was the locust. That it said, because the text said that the locust rested. So it means that it rested, so like people rest on Shabbat. So it represents that idea, that separation. That's the easiest separation. Then between the light and darkness, of course, the plague of darkness, and then separating between the Hebrews and the nation, of course, by the plague of the firstborn. So we are talking about not just a plague, but a participation or a new birth that is happening here. That we have to be active participants with God. One, because we have to get the freedom of choice as participants, as human beings. To worship God means to participate in the work of creation. And of course, to give everything that we have, a full offering, is to be able to worship God. Okay, so chapter 11, if you follow it in our book, page 346, it says, the Lord said to Moses, 1 more plague shall I bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. After that, he shall send you forth from here. When he sends forth, it shall be complete. He shall drive you out of here. Please speak to the ear of the people. Let each man request his fellow and each woman from her fellow silver vessels and gold vessels. The Lord granted the people favor in the eyes of Egypt. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the eyes of the servants of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of the people. So at this point, Egypt understands that there's a birth here. So they actually participate in sending off the Israelites. Another idea about why they would give them the silver and gold is because to compensate them for 400 years of work. So there's going to be justice in this story. Moses said, so said the Lord, at about midnight I shall go out in the midst of Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the maidservant who is behind the millstone, and all the firstborn of beast. Okay, so there's a very slight nuance here that you have to really look very carefully, but it's very significant actually. The Talmud tells us that when God tells Moses that he will strike the firstborn, he says at midnight. At midnight. But when Moses then quotes God, he says at about midnight. Why would Moses change that? What is the significance of exactly midnight and about midnight? So, of course, from God's perspective, God knows exactly when it's going to happen. And there's a beautiful concept about this. The Talmud again tells us that when God told Abraham 400 years earlier that his children are going to be servants. They didn't specify that it would be Egypt, but they would be servants, slaves, for 400 years, and then they'll go out. So, according to that midrash, that teaching, it says that it happened at midnight. So, God, being very precise, that the 400 years exactly expired at midnight. Just like we see the ball drops on New Year's Eve, and then it symbolizes the new year. This is it. So it has to be exactly at midnight. But from Moses' perspective, he didn't want the Egyptians to say, if it didn't happen exactly at midnight, to say, it wasn't really, as you exactly said. Now, it seems petty, right? After all that they've gone through, they're still going to have an excuse why this was not a big miracle of the hand of God. But as you know, with the people who are litigious, they are, it's all about the word, right? And they catch you in the word. And the fall of Adam and Eve happened because the serpent caught them with their, by the word. When Eve said, God said, don't eat from the fruit. And that's not what God said. God said, God said, don't eat. But the serpent said, but he didn't say, don't touch. Right? So, and then she touched it, and then she ate it, and so forth. So, that happened exactly at midnight. So, every firstborn is going to die. And then there shall be a great outcry in the entire land of Egypt, such as there never again, and never will be in the future. So that you shall know that the Lord will have differentiated between Egypt and Israel. That's really the point of all that. Then all these servants of yours will come down to me and bow to me, saying, leave, you and your entire people that follow you. And then, if you want to turn to page 348, but it's almost chapter 12, it says, after that I will leave, and ye left Pharaoh's presence in a burning anger. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, so that my wonders may multiply in the land of Egypt. So Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not send out the children of Israel from the land. In chapter 12, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be yours for the beginning of months. It shall be for you the first of the months of the year. So this is where we get the calendar. Up until now, there's no specific calendar because of different reasons. One, this is the birth of the Hebrew, the Jewish people in a sense, or as a people. But it's also the birth of freedom. Right? The idea of not being slaves to people, and being slaves to God, right? We're not leaving just to be, Father Roy said, dancing in the desert, is to be slaves to God. But slaves to God is freedom. That's what it means. When you're 100% slave to God, that is 100% freedom. I know, it doesn't make sense when you think about it, but when you really experience it, then you understand that why is it total freedom, and actually we'll remind ourselves here that the word engraved, when the Ten Commandments were engraved on the tablets, the Talmud says, don't read it as engraved. In Hebrew, the word engraved is charut, and freedom is cherut. Same letters. It's just a little bit of a different pronunciation. But it means that when you engrave the 10 commandments on your person, you are totally free. Why? Because then all the distractions in the world, all the temptations are not going to be able to distract you from the path that you need to walk. But we are now, as we say, we count 6,000 years almost, and the Jewish calendar is 5,784. And the reason, it says 75, sorry, 85 now. This is 85. 5,785 from the Garden of Eden, from the creation. Because back then we had everything, but we didn't choose to choose God. So all this 6,000 year cycle should be that we have the freedom of choice, and we should choose to worship God fully, to be slaves to God. That's the story. Okay, so why is it important to have a calendar here? Because the calendar actually distinguishes, when we say distinguishes between Egypt and Israel, not just between two people. It's distinguishing between two ideas in this world. The idea of slavery, that one on top of the other, and Israel with the tribes, that everybody goes to God, directly to God. So it's more like egalitarian society. And that really is the idea. But the calendar actually is where you go from slavery to freedom. How so? When you're a slave, you're not in charge of your time. You're told what to do, when, and how. When you are free, you now have to control your time. So that's one thing about the calendar. Then another reason is because now, with all the other births that we experience here, there's another birth of another concept, which is a destination. It's a destination. It's not just creating a calendar that will revolve around itself and come back to the same place. But just like Father Roy likes to say, it's like a corkscrew, that it does repeat itself, but it goes forward. And it's very interesting because the word year in Hebrew, you know, it's Shana Tova, right? We say Shana Tova or Shana. It means to repeat. Shana means to repeat. So in one sense, life is nothing, like King Solomon said, nothing new under the sun, in one sense. But the same word for Shana in Hebrew means to change. So it's to repeat, but in a different way. So every year presents, of course, a different challenge, as we all know. Every year has a new reality that we have to face. But it means that we are now going somewhere. And that really is the key to all that. When you're a slave, think of even of the image of a slave. The hamster on the right, the wheel keeps going and going and going without rest, without purpose. That is what we are now changing. And it has to involve death here. Because, as we know, people don't just give up power that they have. People don't just change when they are in charge. Power is a very addictive thing, and people don't just give it up. That's why we have revolutions in this world. That's why all these episodes in history that were not pleasant, because those who were in power, in charge, were not giving off from their power to the people. So that's why America starts with, we the people. And that really shares the same idea of Judaism. That's why when we do talk about Judeo-Christian values, this is what we talk about. That it's not perfect, our systems have not been perfect, as you know, but the mindset is of equality, rights, and sharing the resources. Okay, so there's an introduction of the calendar, and then it says, speak to the entire Assembly of Israel, saying on the 10th of this month, that will be the first month of your calendar. So there's a difference between the first month that we say Rosh Hashanah. You know Rosh Hashanah, right? But that's in September. Sometimes it's in October. But it is in Tishrei, the month of Tishrei. It's in the fall. So this, how come it's not the first month? If this is, so we're celebrating two different things. There are 4 new years in the Jewish calendar. Basically, every season is a new year for different purposes. So the Rosh Hashanah represents the creation of the world. But Passover, the month in the spring, is representing the birth of Israel. So, and we say that God created the world for the purpose of Israel. For that idea that will come a nation that will live according to God's laws that of the relationship, that God created this world for the relationship, and that we'll have a good relationship with God, meaning we'll follow His commandment, we'll worship God. So on the 10th of this month, they shall take for themselves each man a lamb or kid for each father's house. The 10th of the month, what do we know that there's another 10th of the month? The holiest day on the Jewish calendar is Yom Kippur. That is the 10th of the month of Tishrei. And it's exactly 6 months from Passover. And Yom Kippur is 4 days before the holiday of the Feast of Booth. So the Feast of Booth is the exactly 6 months away from Passover. So we have the creation of the world and the creation of the people of Israel on a balance. So one begins the calendar and one ends the calendar. That's the separation between light and day in the calendar itself. We have all the holidays happen between Passover and Sukkot. The Feast of Booths. But this 10th of the month is the 4 days before Passover, just like we have the Yom Kippur 4 days before Sukkot. Why? And we talked about it before that you have to prepare yourself and cleanse yourself and be ready when you enter God's sanctuary. Okay, so it says each man will take for themselves a lamb or a kid for each father's house. A lamb or a kid for the household. Now what is the idea, the story of the kid? Why does it have to be a lamb and not any other animal? And this is where, again, we go into story of redemption. This is, of course, a story of redemption. But what are we redeeming here? There's something very important that we're redeeming here. The lamb represents, in one animal, we have a representation of both biggest sins that were committed by the people of Israel, the family of, and then the people of Israel too, with God. So far, when we speak about the story of Egypt, there's only one aspect of it, and I'll explain. When the brothers of Joseph sold him, they were going to kill him first, right? But then they decided to sell him. And what they did, they took a lamb, and they took the blood of the lamb and put it on his tunic, and then brought it to his father. So the sin of, there are two sins that we consider. One, sins between God and man, and between man and man. So the sin that we take as the quintessential one, that represents the harshest example of that sin between people, is the selling of Joseph by his brothers. Because think about it, you have the closest relationship between people, the brothers, and then you break it in such a way that not only did they want to kill him and then they sold him, but there's another aspect here of the hardship that they gave their father, that they caused their father. So we keep correcting that. And full redemption cannot happen in the Jewish story without the family coming back together. So what do we have here? We have a lamb. Instead of separating between the family members, because think about the tragedy of that episode. Even though he didn't die, but in the eyes of his father he did die. And they started blaming each other too, because when they came back and they saw how their father reacted, and he became a perpetual mourner, they started blaming each other. They said to Judah, "Had you told us to bring him back, we would have done that." And then the next story was that he did. He kind of went down, it says, from his brothers. He was not the leader anymore because they blamed him for that. So everybody was blaming each other. There was brokenness in that family to the deepest degree. So now we are putting it together. Later on, when the people of Israel go to the desert and they're supposed to worship God, what do they end up worshiping? The golden calf, right? So it's the same idea in one. You're supposed to come together. So that lamb, you have to cover. It says to cover the lamb. That the lamb brings you together as a family. And it said, his house will take according to the number of people. Everyone according to what he eats shall be counted for the lamb or kid. Another aspect of this redemption, of course, that we all have our part of the story. This redemption story, when they took out Joseph out of the family, they thought they can take him out of the story, and everything basically became broken. So everybody has a place. And the Talmud tells us, one of the first things that our rabbis teach us, that there is no such thing as, there's no person that doesn't have his or her time and place. And there's no thing in this world that doesn't have a time and place. So everything you can think about, there's time and place and amount. These are the things. So everything that exists in this world, has a purpose. You just have to know when and where and how much. So then it says, it has to be an unblemished lamb or kid, a male within its first year shall it be for you. From the sheep or goat shall you take it. There's of course the famous distinction between the sheep and the goats. Do you want to talk about the sheep?
Yeah.
The sheep follow God, follow the shepherd. Sheep, that's why they became that terminology of being sheep-like. That you follow blindly, you trust 100% the shepherd. But goats are not like that, right? Goats jump around, they go on the rocks, they go off the path, as we say. So we can say, compare them to total righteous people and sinners. So, but both have a place around the table. And that's really very important. And we say, everybody, when we start the Seder night, the first thing we say, everybody that wants to come around the table can come and share. The only caveat is that they have to be circumcised. But we'll leave that alone for now. I don't ask my guest. Say, I want to have to come to the Seder. But it says that only, but it really what it means, of course, in the Torah it says physically has to be circumcised, but I would take it to another level, just like Paul took it in the church and said that that Gentiles don't have to circumcise literally to become Christian. I would say that, or become whatever that sect was. It really, there's another place in the Bible that said, I will circumcise your heart. So you have to come with a full heart to sit around this table. It shall be yours for examination until the 14th day of the month, those 4 days that you hold the lamb. The entire congregation of the assembly of Israel shall slaughter in the afternoon. They shall take some of the blood and take it and put it on the doorpost and to the lintel and the houses in which they will eat it. They shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted over the fire, and matzot. Matzot is the unleavened bread. With bitter herbs shall they eat it. Okay, so we're entering here the whole Passover and the interesting, again, the date that we're teaching this, the Last Supper. That's the idea. The fire, so the question about why you should roast it and not boil it and eat water. First of all, it's quicker, just like the unleavened bread. It said that they had unleavened bread because they didn't have enough time for it to rise. So it's a matter of time, but also could be other thing. It lasts better, or it's it really, fire is the first choice of cleansing something. We are used to cleansing ourselves with water because fire is going to kill us. But if we talk about, for example, vessels to be kosher for Passover, you first want to bring through the fire. And only if you don't have the option of fire, you dip it in water. So fire is really the more effective disinfectant. Then it says, you shall not eat it partially roasted or cooked in water, only roasted over fire. Its head, its legs, with its innards. You shall not leave any of it until morning. Any of it that is left until morning, you shall burn in the fire. Okay, this is very important concept. Why? Because the leaving it until the morning, now there's we are starting the training of how to be free people. And how are we free? As we mentioned, what is freedom from our theological perspective? Is that we fully believe in God, that we fully give ourselves to God. Which means that if we fully believe in God, we believe that God will provide for us. Just like in the prayer, the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. The whole 40 years in the desert are going to be the training of how to believe in God. Through the manna, the bread that comes from heaven, but does not last overnight. You cannot keep it. A slave, someone who doesn't have that faith, and again, a slave doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is poor. A slave is someone who does not believe in God, that believes in submitting to anything else but God. So you can be a multi-billionaire. Think of, I'm not saying that all multi-billionaires are not faithful people, but if you are multi-billionaire, why would you need another billion? What is it? What does it give you? Another billion. So clearly it's because you don't have that faith that God will provide for you the next day. And the Talmud tells us if a person that loves money will never be satisfied. Because if you believe in money, just like you can't worship God and mammon at the same time. If you like mammon, if you worship mammon, then you're really worshiping yourself. You think that your destiny is only in your hand. So you don't have that faithful mindset that the God that took care of you up to here will continue to take care of you. So the manna, which means emunah, in Hebrew the word for manna means faith. So it was an exercise of faith, how not to hold back, and that doesn't mean that we don't need to save for a rainy day and help God help us. But even when we save for a rainy day, we have to have that faith that really, at the end of the day, it's the hand of God. I've seen many people that lost everything they had in the Madoff, collapse, and people who believed in that nest egg the rest of all these years, and all of a sudden it's gone. People who believe in all kinds of things, and it's gone overnight. So this is what it means. So the exercise of faith starts on the night of the birth. You can't leave it to the morning. So shall you eat it, your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is a Pesach, Passover offering to the Lord. So the Passover offering, Passover, Pesach, in Hebrew, lifsoach, the Passover, it means that not just the angel of death passed over the people of the Israelite, but it also means that we are now passing over. We're passing over into a new reality. So that reality has to be that we're always ready. It's not just on that night. It means that from now on, we're always going to be ready for everything. Why? Because God can ask us for a commandment to be there at any moment. Redemption can be at any moment in our life. If God calls on you, the answer should be, Hineni, here I am. I'm girded. My shoes are on. I'm ready to go. No excuses. That is a free person that has direct relationship with God. If you're a slave, you don't care. because your master is going to be responsible. There is no such thing anymore. We are now masters. We are now a nation of priests. We're all now priests. We're all now are responsible to bring offerings to God at any moment. I shall go through the land of Egypt and on this night, and I shall strike every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the man to beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I shall mete out punishment. I am the Lord. So this is again another difference between all the other plagues and this one. This one, God says, I'm doing it. It's not Moses, it's not Aaron, it's not an angel. It's I am going to do this myself. And so what is it? Why does God have to do this himself? First of all, of course, this is going to be the ultimate strike against the ego of Pharaoh. So God has to be there himself. So if the whole thing was an exercise of faith in God and the acknowledgement of God's creation and the hand of God, he needs to be there himself. But there's another point to it. Remember, we were talking about the progression of the 3 steps of the 3 sets of 3 plagues, from universal acknowledgement of God into the providence of God. This is now going further, another step in the personal relationship. God told Pharaoh from the beginning, he said, you let my people go, but he told him, Israel are my firstborn. That is the terminology that God used. B'ni bechori, my firstborn. And if you're not going to let my firstborn go, I will strike your firstborn. And you can only do that measure for measure idea, because that's how God operates. That's how God educates us in this world. That's how we see the hand of God. The measure for measure. That I will show you now the measure for measure personally. And that God is not just a universal creation and transcendent God. God is immanent. God is looking at each person specifically. And further specifically, the people of Israel as his firstborn. This day shall become a remembrance for you, and you shall celebrate it as a festival for the Lord, for your generations, as an eternal decree shall you celebrate it. For a 7-day period shall you eat matzot, the unleavened bread, but on the previous day you shall nullify the leaven from your homes. For anyone who eats leavened food, that soul should be cut off from Israel from first day to the 7th day. Again, we're coming to the final hour of this whole exercise. What was that whole exercise? Is to battle the ego of Pharaoh. Really, the ego in general that exists in this world. That it's me, it's my doing, it's not God. I love that joke about this guy who prayed to God. He was in New York City looking for parking, and you know how hard it is, and he prays to God, and he says, I'll give you my firstborn if you give me now a parking spot. And all of a sudden the parking spot opened, and he says to God, don't worry, I found it. So God has to make sure until this last moment that we don't have that ego, that ego doesn't come back. And being leavened, the leavened bread, is that ego rising. That's the same equivalence. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. On the seventh day shall be holy for you. No work may be done on them except for what must be eaten for any person. You shall safeguard the matzot, for on this day I shall have taken your legions out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day for your generations and as an eternal decree. In the first month, right, this is now first month, on the 14th day, the full moon, always all three pilgrimage holidays are on the full moon, 14th day of the month, every shall be eat matzot until the 21st day of the month in the evening. For 7 days, leaven may not be found in your houses. For anyone who eats leavening, shall your soul be cut off from the assembly of Israel. Okay, now it says, Moses called on to the elders of Israel and said to them, draw force or buy for yourselves one of the flock for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. So he is now telling them what God told them. You shall take a bundle of hyssop and dip it into a blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the two doorposts. I'm sure you didn't catch it, but rabbis who looked at this text for 800 years and deliberated over it saw a nuance here, an interesting nuance, because when God tells Moses to put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel, the order is different. The order is first the doorpost and then the lintel, and Moses said lintel and then two doorposts. So one of the explanations is that Moses wanted to honor God, because the Midrash says that the two doorposts were Aaron and Moses, and the lintel was God. So God, he wanted to honor and say God first, and the doorpost second. That is in the basin. And as for you, no man shall leave the entrance of his house until morning. I have to tell you, something amazing happened in 2020 during COVID. This commandment in Egypt not to leave the house the whole night was the only time in the history of Israel that the Jewish people were commanded to do that. All the other Passovers, there's a difference between, the Talmud makes a distinction, the rabbis make a distinction. There was the Passover in Egypt, but there was the Passover that will be later on every year. They're a little different. Not every year we literally physically leave Egypt and the death of the firstborn and all that experience. But some of it is shared. In 2020, in Israel, it didn't happen here so much because of the curfew here was not so, I guess, mandatory. But in Israel, there was a mandatory curfew on the Passover night because of COVID. Not because of anything else. But it was that experience of Egypt that nobody could leave the house all night. It was incredible. And back then people said, this has to be a harbinger of something. It can't be just, accidental that something like this would happen on the night of Passover. So, and I think ever since COVID, we've seen the world changing. As we like to say, we see the footsteps of the Messiah. Again, we don't know, we can't, God has his own timing, but it sure does look like it. So the Lord will pass through to smite Egypt, and he will see the blood that is on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and the Lord will pass over the entrance, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses to smite. You shall observe this matter and decree for yourself and for your children forever. I shall be it shall be that when you come to the land of the Lord will give you, as he's spoken to you, you shall observe the service, and it shall be that when your children say to you, what is this service to you? You shall say, it is the Passover feast offering to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but he saved our household. And of course, come to our model Seder, and we'll talk about it more, about the idea of when generations live in freedom, like American youth live in freedom, and maybe sometimes take it for granted. Living in Israel, when I was born in Israel, I have to say I didn't take it totally for granted, but I didn't understand fully what it meant that you really can live in a society that is oppressive, that is dictatorial, and that takes rights away from you. It was at midnight. So now we get to the plague itself. It was at midnight that the Lord smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and every firstborn of animal. Pharaoh rose up at midnight, he and his servants, and all Egypt, and there was a great outcry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was no corpse. He called to Moses and Aaron at night and said, rise up, go out from among my people, even you, even the children of Israel. Go and serve the Lord as you have spoken. So that's the end of that, and a lot of it was the discussion around the firstborn, the plague of the firstborn, is not just the plague itself, but really what it means, the background and the story behind it. So in at least my part, in conclusion, I would say that this is just a reminder of how this is a different plague from all others. We had to participate in it. We were born as a nation. We now have a purpose, of course, to worship God, to follow a destination, a destiny of final redemption. Egypt was the beginning of redemption, and then, of course, we're always waiting for a final redemption, when all these lessons that we learn here on the night of the firstborn, coming together as a family, as a people, not worshiping anything but God, giving ourselves fully, and living the 2 sides of the tablets, the commandment be man and man, and the commandment be man and God, fully. That will happen when the Messiah comes. And of course, because we're an interfaith class here, we say that when the Messiah comes, the first question we'll ask him is, have you been here before? And this is how we'll know. But final redemption will come, and hopefully soon in our days. Thank you.
We're going to open it up for questions, and the first 2 questions we'll give to Father Roy.
Well, more points of clarification, really, just to see. Let me get to the mic.
So, remember back in the other discussions, for sure, we've had the opportunity to study the text before, especially at the Passover Seder, and so we're right there again. So these are from other conversations along the way. But I was very struck with the idea of the moon, under the full moon, that the sacrifice is to be done in the it says afternoon, I see in the text here. But that the sacrifice that was going to be of the lamb, when you have a full moon, it's pretty bright outside. You don't miss anything. And that the lamb was procured 4 days before, separated from the flock. I thought that was really fascinating too, this idea that you get to know this lamb. It's not just a bunch. And so there is this personal relationship, you might say, with the lamb. This is a particular lamb. Therefore, you get to know the lamb. There's a relationship established a little bit. And then the cost of what that means, that this lamb will be sacrificed, and that you're going to watch it. The whole assembly, the whole family would be gathered to watch it. So I thought that was something just to point out again. Another detail that perhaps for Christians we understand that the lamb we got to know a bit. He was with us for a time. And then the other question is the word use of flesh. In English, I don't know if it's in Hebrew. We clarify, that's the question. Are they interchangeable? When we speak of flesh, we usually think of human flesh. And then there's animal meat. And so we usually in English we don't say flesh for I want to eat the flesh of a cow. I want beef, I have meat. We call it meat. So there's a distinction there. You want to clarify?
No exception. There's no differentiation.
There's no difference, it's just the same word. No, there's only one word. We have 2 words. Okay, well, that's interesting. Okay, any questions now we can start with? Okay, Jeff.
Yes, I was wondering, what is the significance of you shall take a bundle of hyssop and dip it in the blood? Because we know when Jesus was being crucified, that he was given
It's not working. The hand mic is not working.
vinegar on hyssop, right? Rag soaked in vinegar, hyssop. So
Right.
I noticed that. So what is the significance and why were they supposed to take a bundle of hyssop?
So the question is about hyssop. Oh, do you have that?
Just repeat.
Yeah, just repeat, yeah. So the question is, why was hyssop used in the spreading of the blood onto the lintel and the doorposts? So the use of hyssop there, and then on the cross, hyssop was used to bring the vinegar wine to Jesus to sip on hyssop again. And what's the use of hyssop?
It's the size of the stem. They're narrow, so it's easier to do what you're going to do, like spread the blood or whatever it may be. It's not bulky, so when you put them all together, it tends to be easier to deal with, and the stems of the hyssop tend to be narrower.
So it becomes
That's what
like a
it's
swab. Yeah. I also heard on one of the pilgrimages that hyssop, whatever the makeup of the plant is, it negates the smell. It somehow doesn't make, blood after a while is going to smell, and it begins, decomposition, I guess. But hyssop preserves that. It's used to de-smell something. I think I've heard this idea. I don't know.
For what we say, it's a humble.
You got the microphone there.
Where?
It's not on.
So you can say it's a humble bush.
All right, it's a humble plant. So also is a humble plant. Okay. Any question yet?
Andrea has a question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Another question, quick. About how many Jews did leave Egypt at the time of the Exodus, and were any Jews left behind or did not practice this ritual and whose children were firstborn were left to die? Or did every Jew in Egypt follow these orders?
So there were other people.
Yeah. Sorry.
So, the question is how many people approximately left?
And how many Jews did not leave?
Yeah, so we don't know exact numbers of Jews who died in Egypt, but we know that there were 4/5. That's what the 80% were left behind, died in the plague of darkness, so they didn't leave. But we know that other people joined Erev Rav. There were a multitude of people who joined them when they left.
Who
So
were
it was
not?
an exercise of the land. It wasn't just for the Jewish people, right? And then all those multitude that left with them also stood at Mount Sinai with them. So that number is said was about 2 million, because the number that is given in the text, that there were 600,000 men who left. So from the age of 20 up. So if you calculate women, maybe the same amount of women, children, and the multitude, it's approximated as 2 million.